Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of Alien Earth Episode 6, The Fly. We finally see the fifth species get some as Kirsh just decides, you know what, screw everyone at this place. I'm gonna break down this episode scene by scene for the details you missed. And the shirt I'm wearing is another variant of the very, very cool alien-inspired designs that we have at our exclusive merch store, nerdriot.shop. This one centered around the loader. And speaking of Sigourney Weaver, she had some nice words to say about this Alien Earth series.
I especially love what Noah is doing, this confluence between the greed of the human race and their willingness to, naively interact with this other species. I'm enjoying the show so much because it's much broader than the alien itself.
Now, we spend most of this episode on Neverland Island, and so that's what we see in the opening previously on Strange Brew bumper. But oddly, there's this new shot that we don't get to this episode with the smoldering remains of the beheaded xenomorph from episode 3 on its tray beside this human with its chest cavity open. Now, I thought this might be Arthur from like a future episode after that chestburster embryo that I assume is now in his chest has popped out or has been ripped out because it looks like it has been surgically opened, but I don't know if this is Arthur. Like, it kind of looks like the same shirt and pants, but he's wearing different shoes. The guy has different hair and not the same kind of facial hair that Arthur has. So who is this? It's not Malachite, even though Malachite's chest was open like this, but I don't think they brought his remains back from the Maginot. So what are we looking at here? We also get a shot of some of that decapitated xenomorph's acidic blood oozing over the side of the tray. So who knows what escape hole that's gonna burrow through the lab floor. We hear Boy Cavalier reading another quote from J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan book. This is actually the opening words of the book from chapter 1. Peter breaks through.
All children, except one, grow up.
And before we dig into this quote, it's pretty interesting to hear Boy Cavalier say these words over a shot over the 3 alien ovomorphs, hatchlings that will stay in an embryonic state until finding some host to latch onto. And I guess you could say there's some kind of interesting dark parallel to these ovomorphs being lost boys in their own right, and by one of them hatching out of the egg, he's kind of a lost boy who matures into an adulthood. And I bring this up because from what we know about the xenomorph eggs, they don't have an expiration date. They might be able to stay in this state for hundreds or thousands of years if left undisturbed, perhaps sustaining themselves on a kind of perpetual gamma radiation until some future unsuspecting host species stumbled upon them. Now, the full J.M. Barrie quote goes as follows: all children except one grow up. They soon know that they will grow up, and the way Wendy knew was this. One day when she was 2 years old, she was playing in a garden, and she plucked another flower and ran with it to her mother. I suppose she must have looked rather delightful, for Mrs. Darling put her hand to her heart and cried, "Oh, why can't you remain like this forever?" This was all that passed between them on the subject, but henceforth Wendy knew that she must grow up. You always know after you are 2. 2 is the beginning of the end. Like much of J.M. Barrie's text, it's a rather melancholy sentiment. 2 is the beginning of the end? Yikes! Barrie is essentially saying from the moment a toddler first becomes aware of themselves and their own aging, the magic of living at all begins to dim. Now, the except one aside in Barrie's 3rd and 4th words of the book is a reference to Peter Pan himself, the boy who never grows up. But the flip side of this is literally all other kids, including Wendy, her brothers, and the Lost Boys, will inevitably grow up. For all the fun Peter Pan has with these Lost Boys, eventually those kids will leave him and go back to reality or even die. Like we hear this episode how Peter Pan would eventually rotate out his Lost Boys, implying that Peter was constantly being disappointed. And we see how this hits the hybrid kids in all kinds of ways.
We're grown-ups now.
Being grown-up sucks.
The boys on the island vary, of course, in numbers, according as they get killed and so on. When they seem to be growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out.
To me, the richest thematic material this episode puts forward is the way Kirsh describes these hybrids as stars, near eternally burning cosmic engines that will exist long after we are gone, existing on a scale that our small onion minds cannot fathom. But we also in this episode, for the first time, see one of those stars snuffed out. During this voiceover, the sheep controlled by the Teocellus watches Wendy as she uses her vocal chirping to try to communicate with the young xenomorph. Now, a couple interesting things here. Wendy later says that she's trying to get the pronunciation right. The pronunciation, not the actual lexicon. Like to her, it's all the same thing. Does she know yet what words are being communicated between them? Is it something like food, hungry, or is it like back the f off? But also, yeah, a little baby xenomorph, but beyond a chest burster. This is the next stage of the chest burster that came out of the lung that we saw in the past episode. And I think this is the first time we are seeing a xenomorph at this adolescent stage. Once the chest burster has shed its husk of the thicker tail and now has sprouted legs. legs. This is the in-between stage between the chestburster and what we know will be the larger xenomorph. And I love how, because it's a smaller scale, we can get a sense of the full xenomorph anatomy that we don't always get a clear sense of when the xenomorph are fully adult-sized. Its movement is more quadrupedal, the way humans often crawl before we walk. The joints of its hind legs allow a lower crouch. It has 4 outgrowths on its back, hinting at the various outgrowths on the back of the adults that run all the way down the spine. And you get a sense that it's using its tail to balance right now, before it instinctively knows to use its tail as a stabbing weapon, or as a lasso that they often use to just knock people off their feet, which feels like kind of like a prank, right? Like they could stab it and they're like, it'll be more fun to see them fall to the ground. The Teocellus sheep takes all of this in, noticing the adolescent xenomorph and the hive of the flying creatures that emerge in this episode, as well as the red versus green light that signals when these cages are locked and when they're not. There's actually a great article from Polygon about the sheep that they use for this show, who's named Victoria, and how they trained this sheep to be so calm for all of these takes. The child xenomorph lunges at Wendy. Maybe this is how they show love, or maybe it's just learning faces to kill, or maybe Wendy accidentally clicked some xenomorph slur. Kirsh says,
She killed an adult male single-handed.
Adult male, you say? Interesting, because I thought I remembered that xenomorph she killed in New Siam being referred to as a she, but it's just not common that these xenomorphs, other than the Queen and aliens, are referred to by any particular gender, since they don't seem to reproduce sexually. Joe says,
Safe isn't always about bodies.
So you're worried about what? Her intellect? Her emotions?
Joe asks some follow-ups about how to maintain hybrid bodies, and Kirsh says,
That's like an onion asking, how do I take care of a star?
oh, come on, Kirsh. She could have picked another noun for Joe Hermit to be than an onion, but at least onions, like ogres, have layers.
Layers!
Kirsh says,
Your sister has potential to invent faster than light travel and explore the stars for thousands of years. And you want her to be a family?
I love this exchange. I'm getting some notes of Tannhauser's Gate from the Tears and Rain monologue of Blade Runner, a movie that some say technically exists in the same universe as Aliens. But either way, he's basically hinting at the profound cosmic experiences that an AI in a synth body could have that a mortal human in our normal flesh bodies cannot. Adam Ines orders that Nibs must be reset before her trauma in the tower, and he says that when representatives from the 5 talk to her and the other hybrids over canapes and cocktails, he wants all of them to be calm and charming, which seems like an interesting hint at what might be coming up. It tells us that Boy Cavalier soon plans to present this whole hybrid program to the other mega corporations, but why? Is it something to sell to them, or is it something to threaten them with? Arthur refuses to reset her, but Adam Ines tells Dame Sylvia to do it, and he fires Arthur and threatens to have him shot if he's still there at the end of the day. Meanwhile, Joe tells Wendy that the species they brought to Earth could be millions of years old, and he tells Wendy not to humanize the creatures with thoughts and feelings and says that they're just killers, but Wendy counters,
Bees do that. Ants do that. They have hives, systems, whole colonies.
yeah, Wendy's not wrong. We saw in 1986's Aliens that xenomorphs do indeed have a hive and a colony structure that parallels those of ants and bees with a queen. Wendy says,
This is a yes place, not a no place.
ugh, I've been to quite a few culty corporate seminars where versions of that were said. Wendy says that Boy Cavalier said that yes leads to progress, but Joe counters that saying no would give Wendy control over her body. Then there's this meeting between Boy Cavalier and Ms. Yutani. I missed this last week, but the Yutani city where episode 5 ends is actually Chicago. There are several new futuristic skyscrapers added to the Chicago skyline, but you can see other buildings that are currently part of Chicago. I probably should have known that because I was freaking married in front of that skyline, but I was just distracted by the fog. We live in a physical world full of objects, and that makes us think that everything behaves like an object. The dog is here, the dog is there, I can keep track of a dog. But data doesn't work like that. Your data can get copied and sold without you ever knowing about it. Delete Me makes it easy to take control of your data because they agree that your data should be yours and yours alone. Delete Me is a hands-free subscription service that helps you reduce the risks of identity theft and scams by removing your data from hundreds of data broker sites. It's super easy to use. You take 5 minutes to submit your info to Delete Me. Their experts comb through the internet looking for places your data shouldn't be, and then they remove it and send you a report on what they've done. Delete Me has been the leading expert in personally identifiable information, PII, removal for over 15 years. Delete Me continuously removes your data using their own tech and doesn't outsource to third parties, so your data stays safe. If you ever need help or have a custom request, you can contact Delete Me privacy advisors, real humans, not bots, for help when you need it. Get 20% off Delete Me consumer plans when you go to joindeleteme.com/rockstars Rockstars and use promo code Rockstars at checkout, or scan the QR code on screen. That's joindeleteme.com/Rockstars and use code Rockstars. Thank you, Delete Me, for sponsoring this video. This meeting is that mediation that Yutani referenced last episode. Boy walks in with his weirdly tassely pants and just the dirtiest bare feet you've ever seen. Seriously, you could stop this guy with Legos. This is the same boardroom that we saw an insert shot of in episode 1 when the crew of the Maginot talked about the 5 corporations. So it must be some kind of neutral ground that the 5 use for meetups like this. Yutani brought Moro with her, while Boy brought Adamines and Kirsh. So this sets up an interesting stare down between the synth and the cyborg after they faced each other on the wreckage of the Maginot back in episode 3. Also, after episode 5, we now know that Moro definitely saw the recording of Petrovich talking to Boy Cavalier to confirm that Cavalier totally arranged that crash. So we have to assume that Yutani probably knows that too, but interestingly, she doesn't bring it up in this negotiation, which tells us something. Does she want Boy Cavalier to feel like he has the upper hand here? She just kind of sits there as Boy Cavalier complains that her ship crashed into 3 blocks of his city, killing and injuring thousands, but it seems like a lot of people in this conversation know that that was his decision to do that. Ugh, and the way Boy props up both legs on the table in this wide spread, yes, it's a bit sexually suggestive, but really it's just his feet. Ugh, like all of this is clearly designed to gross out and offset his corporate rivals. And I wonder if this aspect of Boy Cavalier comes from a lot of the odd quirks and behavior of our Silicon Valley CEOs, specifically the way Mark Zuckerberg went into a lot of his early venture capitalist meetings wearing sandals as a way to like offset them. Boy tells the magistrate that he moves fast and makes trillions, to which Yutani says she'll compare her corporate earnings to his any day. Kind of sounds like she's contesting his reputation as the world's youngest trillionaire, and implies that Wayland Yutani might have some unknown value from projects that Prodigy and other companies don't fully know about. Boy raises the possibility that the crash wasn't an accident, which, yeah, it wasn't, he caused it, but he uses this conspiracy to pressure Yutani in front of the magistrate, crawling across the table kind of like an animal and accusing Yutani of smuggling animals on the planet in a violation of dozens of corporate laws. But Yutani claims that the plan was to take these specimens to an off-planet research facility. We don't know if that's true or not. I'm gonna assume no. They agree on a $20 billion payout for the return of the creatures, but Boy says only after a 6-week quarantine is lifted, which they say comes from the Brubaker Accord. Boy Cavalier tells Yutani that her thoughts and prayers for the victims of the crash are always welcome, evoking the thoughts and prayers phrasing that often gets used after tragedies, and then gets criticized by advocates who say that, can we stop just relying on thoughts and prayers and actually try to do something to prevent these future things from happening? I love this scene with Kirsh and Moro in the elevator, synth versus cyborg. Moro calls him yesterday's model.
What's it like working for a company that's made you obsolete?
He compliments the hybrid, saying, I've got to get me one of those.
A child or a body that isn't so sad.
Ooh, Kirsh is definitely bringing up Moro's dead daughter, Estelle. They compare which of their bodies would be more satisfying to kill, a synth, which would have no emotion to cloud everything up, or a cyborg who would still be able to feel pain.
When the first eyeball pops.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of eyes being popped out this season by the T. Ocellus, and so we can see how that particular visual has left an impression on Kirsh. Moro says,
I'll see you soon, old toy.
Old toy. The sass between these two. The way Moro disregards Kirsh as an older model is similar to how Bishop considered Ash a twitchy older model in Aliens. Dame Sylvia removes the trauma from Nib's memory, and we see her painful experiences in reverse photography, kind of like Eternal Sunshine in the Spotless Mind. But what Dame Sylvia is doing here is kind of like what Miss Darling does in the J.M. Barrie passage read in the previous episode, tidying up her children's minds, burying the deeper thoughts, and bringing up the cleaner ones to the surface. And just like we criticized the logic of that in a previous breakdown, I think we see how that's not a very good fix for Nibs in this episode. Like, one would think if they're going through all that effort, Dame Sylvia should have told Wendy and the other hybrids not to talk to Nibs about those past few days, but sure enough, the moment Nibs wakes up, the whole procedure is rendered pointless. We hear Boy Cavalier reading a different passage from J.M. Barrie. While she slept, she had a dream. She dreamt that the Neverland had come too near and that the strange boy had broken through from it. He did not alarm her, for she thought she had seen him before in the faces of many women who have no children. Perhaps he is to be found in the faces of some mothers also, but in her dream, he had rent the film that obscures the Neverland, and she saw Wendy and John and Michael peeping through the gap. This is one of the final paragraphs of that first chapter of Barrie's book, Peter Breaks Through. It's where the chapter title comes from. These sentences are from the point of view of Mrs. Darling, the mother of Wendy and the boys, sewing by the fire as she watches her children sleep. The mother is the one dreaming about this dirty Peter Pan boy breaking through from Neverland and creating filling the gap for her children to peer back through. And the middle sentences I think are the most interesting to me. How Mrs. Darling would see Peter Pan in the faces of childless women and in mothers too. It kind of renders Peter Pan as like this son figure born from women who cannot have kids, and in general, someone reflected in all women. Like when it comes to Peter Pan, there's sort of this universal orphan quality that makes this child to Ms. Darling universally familiar. Joe draws a map of the Prodigy base, including how many steps down the corridor to the hybrid dormitories. It's kind of similar to the map of the severed floor that we see Lumen employees drawing in the Severance series. I assume when he tries to escape this facility with Wendy, he'll really need this map. Slightly, Arush fails to get Joe to come with him, while Joe patrols with Rashidi and Siberian, who prefer to be outside patrolling the grounds being outside than with the monsters inside. This is the added security that Morrow referenced that would make infiltrating the island difficult, but I like how Siberian says that if she's outside, she knows where the monsters are, which reminds me a lot of Vasquez and Aliens.
I only need to know one thing. Where they are.
Now when we see Wendy communicating with the xenomorph, it appears to have grown in size. These things grow real fast. I don't think more than a few hours have passed. Toodles/Isaac takes Kirsh's order to go check on the lab and make sure the specimens are fed and watered. The fact that Kirsh is telling him to go do it, I think makes me wonder what Kirsh's real game plan is here. We see a close-up of the Teocellus' eye as one of its little pupils merges with the rest to form the full fake pupil. Toodles/Isaac feeds the Teocellus sheep and then feeds the D. Plumbicare and stands to find it splaying its tentacle in his face, just like it did in episode 2 when he faced it down. And while the Teocellus only ever smacks its tentacles around to try to distract the scientists, maybe this thing is just trying to warn the kid. Like, I'm waiting for this little to do something gross. Now, I can understand for a sheep, but I really do not know how Kirsh or Toodles or any of them would know what animals like D. Plumbicare, the tick leeches, or these flying insects would eat to have this kind of food for them. But it sounds like they're trying to put anything in front of them to see what they'll eat. The door for the flying insect gets jammed, and Toodles/Isaac rips it off because he's too strong and doesn't know his own strength. The Teocellus sheep watches him closely as he unlocks the door remotely, and the way a kid would try to do to feed a scary dog that he's dog sitting, uses his chin to balance the tray and awkwardly puts the tray down inside this room until the Teocellus intentionally rams the glass to scare this human to get him trapped inside, just like it did to distract Chibuzo in the lab on the Maginot to allow the tick leeches to escape. The Teocellus is the little shit stirrer who helps these other creatures get advantages because it knows that it would create overall chaos that it can use to get ahead. Before we even get to the anatomy of these new flying creatures, I just love the specificity of its hive structure. It kind of looks like a termite mound with clumpy stalagmites that have accumulated beneath it on the ground, suggesting that over time the top part and the bottom pile would eventually meet and its hive would form like a full column. But the creature itself is like a tarantula-sized beetle with a teal-colored exoskeleton with a sticky trunk that slops from its front end, and then it retracts that trunk to spray a kind of acid on poor Toodles that eats away at his face and causes him to spew up fluid. Now, since all these hybrids have body fluid on the inside with the color and consistency of milk, just like Ash and Bishop did, this may just be his version of that blood, but blue tinted. And I know it's a synth body, but it's just sad when you consider that this was the mind of a boy who likely had no idea what was happening to him in this moment. He emits a kind of mechanical whirring that would be his synth body's form of these pained grunts. And crazily, these things use their trunks to slurp up Toodles' synthetic blood. It may not even be organic matter, but notice that Toodles' food tray did contain all kinds of shit, like metallic stuff, some wood, some minerals. It doesn't look like typical food, so these things may not eat like vegetables. And now we hear Boy Cavalier read a third and final J.M. Barrie passage in this episode. This is from chapter 5 of the book, The Island Come True. The boys on the island vary, of course, in numbers according as they get killed and so on, and when they seem to be growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out. What? As I mentioned before, Noah Hawley really seems to be pulling the darkest passages from J.M. Barrie's source material, and he clearly had a lot to choose from. There was even a bit in there about how it was commonplace for the Lost Boys to die. You know, pirates did kill them sometimes. But in addition to that, when the boys just seem to be growing up, Peter, quote, thins them out? What does that even mean? Wendy confronts Dame Sylvia about the decision to reset Nib's memory. For the first time, she rejects her name of Wendy and seems to default to Marcy, which is a fun inverse considering Joe corrects himself later from Marcy to Wendy, and she says,
I don't want to be people anymore if this is what people are. Killing things,
taking them apart just to see what's inside.
She recalls Kirsh's speech from episode 1, how as hybrids, they could evolve past the emotions that hold humans back. Dame Sylvia says they're trying to deal with new technology and asks Wendy to just tell her what's wrong so that she can try to fix it.
What if you're what's wrong?
Arthur packs up his stuff, including this photo cube of himself with Dame Sylvia. Joe walks in, and behind Joe across the hall, there appears to be a green stain on the floor near the bottom. Is this the door that smoking attendant was spraying? Or is this some staining from the dripping xenomorph blood that's just making its way through everything? Joe asks Arthur about Wendy/Marcy's status, and while Arthur is super aware of the security camera watching him from behind, I guess he's not that worried about Prodigy security monitoring everything he would type on his computer. Arthur uses this to warn Joe to escape with Wendy, and he gives him the boat code, and then on the other terminal he shuts off all the hybrid trackers. Now there's probably going to be some Jurassic Park Dennis Nedry consequence here, right? Of all the hybrids trackers being shut off, because I now worry about Smee and Curly too. They were just playing around with the fish outside. Are they going to be okay? They're off the grid. Now from this, Arthur sees that Toodles isn't connected, and what's crazy is this scene here with Arthur began with Toodles' body on the lab floor being shown on the screen, but then the screen being switched away, which I think was Kirsh or maybe someone else wanting to hide that from Arthur and the other Prodigy workers. And what's really weird is Kirsh is watching most of this go down. He has a camera inside the lab and outside in the corridor, watching Slightly standing there when Arthur steps up. So again, I ask, did Kirsh send Toodles into that room? What is Kirsh trying to do? Like, he's definitely not on the same side as Morrow, but he also seems to hate Boy Cavalier. But Slightly, having failed with Joe, now has another human to complete his mission with in the form of Arthur. Arthur immediately goes into fatherly protective mode to try to get Toodles' body out of that room, but realizes Slightly has unlocked all the cages, which is interesting because Burke did this to Ripley and Newt and Aliens, just unlocking everything and waiting for these gross critters to grab them. Now, I'm not sure how the ovomorphs know to open if Arthur is on the whole other side of the lab, considering the human Boy Cavalier needed to be right next to the eggs for them to open up in the past episode, but the egg does open now, and from out of nowhere, a facehugger latches on to Arthur's face, tightening around his neck, and he goes down. Kirsh watches all this go down from the flight while Boy Cavalier woos and rose from the Titanic, his arms out behind the pilot like he is flying himself, like Peter Pan. This episode's called The Fly. I assume it's a reference to this beetle that comes into action this episode, but I'm also reminded of the title of one of the most famous episodes of Breaking Bad, directed by Rian Johnson, The Fly. That was more of a bottle episode, but did concern with contaminants in a laboratory setting. There was also The Fly, both the original 50s version and the David Cronenberg remake with Jeff Goldblum, that concerned themselves with body horror the way this episode does. I don't know if either the Breaking Bad one or the horror movie are a reference to this episode, but maybe it's just a reference to Boy Cavalier being a big dumb idiot right here. And then, doing as Morrow instructed him, Slightly drags Arthur's body with the facehugger on the head into a vent away from the beetle. We end this episode with the Teocellus sheep breathing fog on the glass as Godsmack's Keep Away plays. I do love the intelligence contrast on this series. People in the future are all kind of dumb because public education has been replaced with corporate education. We're in an idiocracy-esque social oligarchy that has sorted everyone in a specific way, to where even Arthur's 6 degrees left him pretty lacking in common sense. Even Boy Cavalier seems very short-sighted, and we're seeing how childish youth and innocence are valued as virtuous star power over things like wisdom and experience. And the smartest ones in any room are just the nasty little critters with potentially millions of years of evolution guiding their instincts. I'll say that this ultimately means that 75% of the time on the show, we have to listen to very dumb babies or very naive adults. But hey, every now and then we get to hear Kirsh and Morrow rip people new ones, and it'll be even more satisfying when all these other dumbasses get eaten by these things. Comment down below with your thoughts on this episode, and a special thanks to one of our YouTube members, Rick Denmon, who supports us at the executive producer level. Follow me at EA Voss and subscribe to all channels in the New Rockstars network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.